Welcome to Global Risk Profile, the show where we break down the most pressing geopolitical issues shaping our world. If you're new here, Global Risk Profile is a channel dedicated to uncovering global forces shaping our world. From headline news to the deeper stories that don't always make it to the front page. We analyze the key events, explore their global implications, and explain what they mean for individuals, businesses, and nations. Our approach is factual, analytical, and focused on the truth, beyond political agendas. If that's something you're interested in, be sure to stick around. Right now, the U.S. national security apparatus is at a crossroads. Recent reports suggest that the State Department, the CIA, and USAID could face drastic changes or even dismantlement for USAID or others. Once considered pillars of America's global strategy, these institutions are now in the headlines, facing scrutiny, political pressure, and a re-examination of their roles. Some argue they've been necessary for protecting national interests, while others see them as instruments of global overreach, corruption, or even internal subversion. But the real question is, what happens if these institutions are weakened or even abolished? And who benefits the most? At the same time, across the Pacific, the Chinese Communist Party's security apparatus is working hard to become stronger than ever, expanding its influence both domestically and abroad. While the US debates its future role on the world stage, Beijing is pressing forward, utilizing every lever of power, from its intelligence agencies to soft power initiatives, to corporate espionage and digital surveillance, to reshape the world order in its image. So today, we're not just comparing intelligence agencies. We're uncovering the strategies, the philosophies, and the consequences of how these two nations operate in the realm of diplomacy and the realm of shadows. Because in the world of national security, the tools may look similar, but the intent behind them makes a big difference. Let's get to it. Let us start with the means, the tools, the agencies, and the infrastructure these two giants use. At first glance, the national security apparatuses of the United States and the CCP might seem like polar opposites. One country is rooted in the principles of a constitutional republic, the other a one-party authoritarian communist state. Yet when we examine their tools and methods, a pattern emerges. Both nations employ a whole of society strategies to expand influence, control narratives, and achieve their geopolitical objectives. Think about the US first. It has the CIA, the State Department, USAID, and organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy. They don't just operate behind closed doors. They shape global narratives, conduct influence operations, and even help stir the course of political movements worldwide. Ever heard of US providing foreign aid? Sure, it sometimes helps people, but it also builds goodwill, spreads democratic values, and let's be honest, aligns foreign governments with the US interests, at least as an aspirational description. Now let's pivot to China. The CCP has the Ministry of State Security, basically their CIA, handling espionage and counterintelligence. Then there is the Ministry of Public Security, which isn't just about keeping order at home. It also reaches beyond China's borders, targeting dissidents abroad. And let's not forget the United Front, a sprawling network dedicated to influencing foreign elites, universities, media, and even tech companies to push the CCP's narrative. If that sounds like a strategic long game, it's because it is. And this influence extends to business. In the US, corporations like Boeing, Microsoft, and Google benefit from government contracts and foreign policies that open markets. In China, companies previously like Huawei and Alibaba, and more recently EV car companies, are practically arms of the state. With an added twist, they're expected to actively work in the CCP's national security interests, whether through technology transfers or espionage. Now here is where it gets really tricky. Both governments have silenced dissent at home and abroad. In the US, it might mean media spin, censorship of disinformation, on social media, or selective law enforcement. In China, it's at another level. Suppression, arrests, forced labor camps. If you step out of line against the CCP, you disappear. And abroad, influence operations all the way to transnational repression, using violence, lawfare, co-opting mainstream media and social media and influencers, etc. Now, let me take you back to 2017. Bill O'Reilly asked then and again President Donald Trump about Vladimir Putin. He said, "Putin is a killer." And Trump responded, "There are a lot of killers. You think our country is so innocent?" His reaction of shock and disbelief mirrors what happened when Edward Snowden revealed the NSA's surveillance programs. Suddenly, many Americans felt like their government wasn't all that different from authoritarian regimes. And guess what? The CCP and Russia loved it. They pointed at the US and said, "See, you're no better than us." And Snowden, he got asylum in Russia. But that's not the full picture. This is where things take a turn. The means might look similar, but intent is a big part of what separates a free nation state from an authoritarian criminal one. The United States was built as a republic designed to protect individual freedoms, including freedom of belief and freedom of speech. Even when the national security apparatus oversteps, and it has happened more than once or twice, there is room for pushback. Whistleblowers, protests, congressional investigations. It's not perfect, but the system allows for self-correction. The CCP, entirely different story. The party's survival depends on control, not just over people's actions, but over their very thoughts. If you've read the 9 commentaries on the Communist Party, you know that the CCP's entire philosophy is built on deception, struggle, and suppression. It doesn't just use propaganda, it rewrites history, erases cultures, and crushes opposition. And it's not just controlling China, it wants to extend that control globally. Here is something chilling. Every Chinese citizen, anywhere in the world, is seen as a potential asset of the CCP. Basically, it's property. The party expects loyalty, and refusal means personal consequences, or worse, repercussions for their families back home. Americans, though, are not considered property of the US government. Now, one piece of evidence to corroborate the differences we've been discussing is migration patterns. Every year, millions of people try to get into the US, legally or illegally, including thousands of Chinese citizens. But in China, the reverse is true. Even high-ranking Chinese officials, referred to as naked officials, secretly move their families and money to Western countries. They get green cards, buy property, and quietly prepare an escape route. And you don't see citizens of the whole world trying to get into China. That's called voting with your feet. If China is so great or morally comparable to the US, why do its own elites want out? We can use an analogy here to drive the point home. Think about it like a TV show or a big theater production. You can have all the flashy effects, top-tier actors, and massive budgets that make it a huge hit. Everyone's talking about it, but none of that tells you what the show is actually about. Is it pushing themes of deception, power struggles, and backstabbing, or is it telling a story about courage, loyalty, and kindness? The production value might be the same, but the message, the intent behind it, makes all the difference. And the same goes for national security strategies. Now, here's the thing. More and more Americans feel disillusioned with the national security apparatus. They believe it's been used not just for defending the country, but for targeting people within the country in ways that feel eerily similar to tactics used by authoritarian regimes like the CCP. Whether that's entirely fair or not, the fact is the trust is eroding, and that alone is a problem that needs to be dealt with. If the national security establishment wants to fix this, step one is acknowledging that the trust problem exists. Even if many within these agencies believe the criticism is overblown, the reality is perception matters. If people don't trust their institutions, those institutions lose their ability to function properly. And look, a strong national security apparatus is essential, especially for a global power like the United States. But strength doesn't just come from secrecy and operations, it comes from accountability. The US has been there before. In the 1970s, after shocking revelations about intelligence overreach, the Church Committee helped restore faith in these institutions through transparency and reform. There are ways to rebuild trust without weakening national security, but it takes a willingness to confront past mistakes and correct course. At the same time, there is something else to keep in mind. How we fix it matters just as much as the fact that it needs fixing. There is a difference between reforming something for the better and tearing it down out of anger. If the goal is justice, not vengeance, the process will be far more constructive. Abraham Lincoln understood this when he gave his second inaugural address right in the final days of the Civil War. He didn't call for endless retribution. He called for healing. That's something to think about when we talk about reforming national security today. If the goal is to restore trust, there has to be a willingness to fix things without burning everything down in the process. We've covered a lot today. How the US and the CCP use their national security apparatus. How intent makes all the difference. And what's at stake for the future. One could engage in a whole other discussion on whether some of the means national security entities have been using all over the world are actually needed, beneficial, and whether there is a path where they can be used without somewhat corrupting those wielding them. But I've limited our discussion to the world we currently live in. If you found this episode insightful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think the US is still holding on to its founding values, or has it strayed too far? Let me know in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share this episode with them. Thank you for tuning in to Global Risk Profile. Until next time.